I never thought my father's death would tear our family apart. Not like this. Dad had always been the glue that held us together, the voice of reason when Mom and I would clash, the peacemaker when my brother Jack and I fought over trivial things. But now he was gone, and the reading of his will had unleashed a storm I wasn't prepared for. The day started with rain, a fitting backdrop to our collective grief. I arrived at Mr. Peterson's law office 15 minutes early, hoping to gather myself before facing my family. The waiting room smelled of old books and furniture polish, a scent that reminded me of Dad's study. I sat there, staring at the dark wood paneling, remembering Sunday afternoons when he'd let me sit at his desk and pretend to run his construction company. Jack arrived next, his eyes red-rimmed but his posture rigid. He nodded at me but chose a seat across the room. We hadn't really spoken since the funeral 3 days ago, just exchanged necessary information about arrangements. My little brother had grown distant over the years, moving to Boston for college and staying there, visiting only on holidays and sometimes not even then. Dad's illness had brought him home more frequently in the last 6 months, but there was still a wall between us that I couldn't seem to break through. Mom walked in last, accompanied by her sister, Aunt Carol. They were deep in conversation, and Mom barely acknowledged me with a quick wave. She looked older somehow, the lines around her eyes deeper than I remembered. Grief does that to people, I suppose. It ages you overnight. Mrs. Wilson, Jack, Sarah. Mr. Peterson greeted us as he emerged from his office. "Please come in." We filed into the wood-paneled room and took seats around a large conference table. Mr. Peterson, with his silver-rimmed glasses and meticulously trimmed beard, looked exactly like what you'd expect from a small-town lawyer who had been handling the Wilson family's legal matters for 3 decades. "Before I begin," he said, placing a folder on the table, "I want to express my deepest condolences. Robert was a good man and a dear friend." Mom nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Thank you, Harold. He always spoke highly of you." Mr. Peterson opened the folder and cleared his throat. "I'll try to make this as straightforward as possible. Robert was very specific about his wishes. The first part of the will was standard enough. Mom would keep the house and receive a monthly allowance from Dad's life insurance and investments. Various personal items were designated for specific people. Dad's fishing gear to his brother Mike, his collection of first-edition novels to his best friend Tom, his vintage watch to Jack. "To my daughter, Sarah," Mr. Peterson read, "I leave my 51% controlling interest in Wilson Construction." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the blood drain from my face as 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. "What?" Jack's voice cut through the quiet like a knife. "That's not right. I'm the one who studied business. I'm the one who came back to help during the last months. Sarah hasn't shown any interest in the company for years." "Jack, please," Mom started, but he was already on his feet. "No. This is ridiculous. I left my job in Boston to come help Dad when he got sick. I've been learning the business, meeting with clients. Everyone expected me to take over." Mr. Peterson adjusted his glasses. "There's more, Jack. If you'll let me continue." Jack sat down, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. "To my son, Jack," the lawyer continued, "I leave my remaining 49% share of Wilson Construction, along with the position of Chief Operations Officer, should he choose to accept it." "This is unbelievable," Jack muttered. "Furthermore," Mr. Peterson went on, raising his voice slightly, "it is my wish that my children work together to run the company that has been my life's work. Sarah's experience in project management and Jack's business acumen would make them an unstoppable team." I sat there, stunned. Dad had never once mentioned wanting me to take over the company. I'd worked there during summers in high school, and for 2 years after college, before moving to Portland to join a larger firm. I'd learned a lot from him, sure, but I'd never expressed interest in coming back permanently. And now I was supposed to be the majority owner. There must be some mistake, I finally said, finding my voice. Dad knew I was happy with my job in Portland. I can't just drop everything and move back here. "It's not a mistake," Mr. Peterson said gently. "Robert and I discussed this at length during his last months. He believed you had the right temperament to lead the company, Sarah. He was very proud of what you've accomplished in Portland, but he always hoped you'd come home eventually." "This is such bullshit," Jack stood up again, his face flushed with anger. I'm the one who wanted to be part of the company. I'm the one who came back. And now I'm supposed to work for my sister who doesn't even want to be here. Jack, that's enough, Mom said sharply. Then this was your father's decision. A decision he made while he was sick and not thinking clearly. Jack's voice was rising. I gave up everything to come back here. I broke up with Emily. I left my apartment. I put my whole life on hold because Dad needed me, and this is how he repays me. The hurt in his voice was unmistakable, and despite my own confusion, I felt a pang of sympathy for him. He wasn't wrong. He had made sacrifices to be here during Dad's illness, while I had only managed weekend visits when I could get away from work. Jack, I don't understand this either, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But yelling isn't going to help. Let's hear the rest of it, and then we can figure this out. He threw me a look that could have frozen fire. Easy for you to say. You just got handed a company you don't even want. The meeting deteriorated from there. Mom tried to play peacekeeper, but Jack was too hurt, too angry to listen. I sat there feeling increasingly uncomfortable, caught between guilt over receiving something I hadn't asked for and resentment at Jack's assumption that I couldn't handle the responsibility. By the time we left Mr. Peterson's office, the rain had stopped, but the dark clouds lingered, just like the shadow that now hung over our family. Jack stormed off without saying goodbye, and Mom looked at me with tired eyes. He'll calm down, she said, though she didn't sound convinced. Just give him time. I nodded, but as I watched my brother's retreating figure, I wondered if anything would ever be the same again. Dad had left us more than just a company to run. He'd left us a mess to clean up, and I had no idea where to begin. 3 days later, I found myself standing outside the weathered brick building that housed Wilson Construction. I'd avoided coming here since the will reading, spending my time instead helping Mom sort through Dad's personal belongings, but I couldn't put this off any longer. I needed to at least see what Dad had left me. The familiar logo, a stylized W with a beam across it, brought back a flood of memories. Summer jobs as a teenager, learning to read blueprints at Dad's knee, the smell of coffee and sawdust that seemed to permeate everything. I took a deep breath and pushed through the glass doors. Sarah. Oh my goodness. Sarah Wilson. The receptionist, Linda, practically leapt from her chair to envelop me in a hug. She'd been with the company since before I was born and had always snuck me candy when I visited Dad at work. It's so good to see you, honey. Though I wish it were under better circumstances. Thanks, Linda. It's good to see you too. I managed a smile. Is Jack in? Her expression shifted slightly. He's in your dad's... Well, I guess it's his office now. He's been here since 7 this morning. I nodded, unsurprised. Jack had always been an early riser, even as a kid. I'll head back there, then. The hallway hadn't changed a bit. Same beige walls, same framed photos of completed projects, same worn carpet. But it felt different walking down it now, knowing that technically, I owned the majority of everything around me. I paused outside Dad's office, my hand hovering near the door. Through the frosted glass, I could see a silhouette. Jack hunched over the desk, just like Dad used to sit. I knocked softly. I'd come in, he called, his voice neutral. When I opened the door, I was struck by how little had changed. The same massive oak desk dominated the room. The same family photos lined the credenza. The same architectural drawings were framed on the walls. The only difference was my brother sitting in Dad's chair, looking simultaneously at home and out of place. Morning, I said, hovering in the doorway. Jack glanced up, his expression unreadable. Sarah, didn't expect to see you here. I thought we should talk. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. About the company, about Dad's will, everything. What's there to talk about? Dad made his wishes pretty clear. His tone was clipped, and he shuffled some papers on the desk, not quite meeting my eyes. I sighed and took a seat across from him. Jack, this is as much a surprise to me as it is to you. I had no idea Dad was planning this. Really. Because it seems pretty convenient. You get to swoop in and take control of everything I've been working toward. That's not fair. I didn't ask for this. Then turn it down. He finally looked at me directly, frustration evident in his eyes. Dad's eyes. I realized with a pang. If you don't want it, walk away. Go back to your perfect life in Portland. I flinched at his tone but held my ground. It's not that simple. This was Dad's last wish. Jack, I can't just ignore that. So what then? You're going to move back here and run a construction company you know nothing about. I know plenty. I shot back, my own temper flaring. I worked here for 2 years, remember? And I've been managing major construction projects in Portland for the last 5. It's not the same, and you know it. This is a small, family-owned business. The relationships, the community connections, those matter here. You can't just apply your big city corporate approach and expect it to work. He wasn't entirely wrong, which only irritated me more. I'm not trying to change everything overnight, Jack. I'm trying to honor Dad's wishes while figuring out what makes sense for everyone. Everyone except me, he muttered. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Dad wanted us to work together. He said so explicitly in the will. Yeah, with me working for you. He laughed bitterly. The little brother who always followed the rules, always did what was expected, and still ended up playing second fiddle. Is that what this is about? Some childhood rivalry that I wasn't even aware existed? Jack stood up abruptly, running a hand through his hair. Another gesture so like Dad's that it made my chest ache. You really don't get it, do you? I changed my entire life plan because of this company. When I was in high school and you were already gone to college, I started working here after class. Dad taught me everything. The bidding process, dealing with subcontractors, handling client meetings. I went to business school because I wanted to bring new ideas back here. I didn't know that, I said quietly. Of course you didn't. You were off building your own life, which is fine. That was your choice. But this, he gestured around the office, this was supposed to be my future. Everyone knew it. Dad knew it. Then why did he change his mind? Jack's expression darkened. Mom says it's because he was worried about me taking too many risks. She says he thought I was too ambitious, that I'd expand too quickly and put the company in jeopardy. I hadn't known this either. Mom and I had talked about a lot in the days since the will reading, but she hadn't mentioned this particular detail. Is she right? Were you pushing Dad to grow the business? We needed to grow. Jack's frustration was palpable. Dad was stuck in the old ways. He turned down projects that could have doubled our revenue because he didn't want to hire more staff or take on more debt. We've been treading water for years while our competitors expand. And that's why he left controlling interest to me, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. He was afraid you'd risk everything he built. Jack's face flushed. He didn't understand the opportunities we were missing. I tried to explain ROI projections, market analyses, but he just saw risk, not potential. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken accusations and hurt feelings. I looked around the office, trying to imagine myself working here again. Could I really come back? Give up my career in Portland? And even if I did, could Jack and I possibly work together with this much resentment between us? I need time to think, I finally said. This is a big decision, and rushing it won't help anyone. What's there to think about? Either you want it or you don't. It's not that black and white, Jack. There are practicalities to consider. My job, my apartment, my life in Portland, and there's you to consider too. He scoffed. Don't pretend you care what I think. Of course I care. You're my brother. And despite what you seem to believe, I don't want to hurt you. Jack sat back down heavily in Dad's chair. For a moment, he looked younger, more vulnerable, more like the little brother I remembered. What do you suggest then? Give me a couple of weeks. Let me look at the company books, talk to key employees, understand where things stand. Then we can discuss options. Like what? You selling me your shares? There was a hopeful note in his voice that made me wince. Maybe. Or maybe a different management structure. I don't know yet. I stood up, suddenly eager to be out of that office with its ghosts and expectations. I just need some time. He nodded reluctantly. Fine. 2 weeks. Linda can get you access to whatever you need. I turned to leave but paused at the door. Jack, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about Emily and your apartment in Boston. I know coming back wasn't easy. A shadow crossed his face. Yeah, well, some things matter more than others. As I walked back down the hallway, past the photos of buildings my father had created and the people who had worked alongside him for decades, I felt the weight of his legacy pressing down on me. Dad had built something special here. Not just a successful business, but a community. And now it was up to me to decide what happened next. Outside, I sat in my rental car for a long time, staring at the Wilson construction sign. Whatever Dad's reasons, he'd put me in an impossible position. I could walk away and leave Jack in charge, betraying Dad's final wishes. Or I could upend my entire life to run a company I'd never expected to inherit, working alongside a brother who resented my very presence. Some inheritance this was turning out to be. The next morning, I woke early and found myself driving aimlessly through the streets of Lakeside, the small town I'd grown up in but hadn't really seen in years. Main Street had a few new shops, but Joe's Diner still occupied the corner spot where Dad used to take us for Saturday morning pancakes. On impulse, I pulled into the parking lot. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and the familiar scent of coffee and bacon wrapped around me like a warm blanket. I slid into a booth by the window, half expecting to see my teenage self sitting across from Dad, arguing about curfews or college applications. Well, look what the cat dragged in. A friendly voice pulled me from my thoughts. Maggie, Joe's daughter, who had apparently taken over the place, stood beside my table with a coffee pot in hand. Her hair was grayer now, her face more lined, but her smile was exactly the same. Sarah Wilson, as I live and breathe. Hi, Maggie, I said, returning her smile. Looks like not everything in Lakeside has changed. Some things never do, honey. She poured me a cup of coffee without asking. I was so sorry to hear about your dad. He was one of the good ones. Thanks. It's been challenging. She nodded sympathetically. I can imagine. Especially with that business with the will everyone's talking about. I nearly choked on my coffee. Everyone's talking about it. Maggie had the good grace to look embarrassed. Small town, you know how it is. Your dad was well respected around here, and the company employs half the contractors in the county. She patted my hand. Don't worry. Most folks are just hoping you and Jack can work things out. Nobody wants to see Wilson Construction fall apart. Great. Just what I needed. The entire town speculating about our family drama. We're working on it, I said non-committally. I'll have the blueberry pancakes, please. After Maggie left, I sipped my coffee and watched the morning crowd filter in. Many faces I recognized. Mr. Grayson, who taught high school math. Dr. Parker from the clinic on Elm Street. The Stevens brothers who ran the hardware store. A few nodded in my direction, and I found myself wondering if they were Dad's clients, if they were worried about the future of their projects now that he was gone. Mind if I join you? I looked up to find Tom Reynolds standing beside my table, Dad's best friend since childhood, and his fishing buddy for over 40 years. I hadn't seen him since the funeral. Of course not. I gestured to the seat across from me. It's good to see you, Tom. He settled his tall frame into the booth with a slight wince. Arthritis in his knees, I remembered Dad mentioning. You too, kiddo. Though I'm sorry about the circumstances. There was a moment of companionable silence as Maggie brought Tom his usual black coffee and my pancakes. So, he said after she left, how are you holding up? I'm okay. Better than Mom, I think. I poked at my pancakes. She seems lost without him. Tom nodded. 42 years together will do that. But Ellen's strong. She'll find her way. What about you? You were his best friend. A sad smile crossed his weathered face. Miss him like hell. Keep picking up the phone to tell him something, then remembering he's not there. He took a sip of his coffee. But that's not why I came over. Wanted to make sure you're doing all right with the company situation. I set my fork down. Did everyone in town read Dad's will? Tom chuckled. Not everyone. But your dad and I talked about it, those last few weeks in the hospital. He was worried about how you and Jack would take it. Why didn't he talk to us about it? If he just explained his reasoning, would it have made a difference? Tom raised an eyebrow. Jack was pretty set on his vision for the company, and you were pretty set on your life in Portland. He had a point. I just don't understand why Dad would put me in this position. He knew I was happy with my job. Maybe that's exactly why. Tom leaned forward, his voice gentler. Look, your dad was proud of both of you, but he was worried about Jack's enthusiasm. The boy's got big ideas, which isn't bad in itself, but he doesn't have the experience to know which risks are worth taking. And I do. I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. You've got a steadiness to you, Sarah. Always have. Even as a kid, you were the one who thought things through, who considered consequences. Your dad saw that in you. He paused. Plus, you've been managing major projects for Andrews and Bailey, haven't you? You've got experience Jack doesn't. I frowned. How do you know where I work? Tom smiled. Your dad kept tabs. Had that newspaper article about your River Park project framed in his home office. Showed it to anyone who'd look. Something warm and bittersweet unfurled in my chest. I'd sent Dad that article on a whim, never imagining he'd display it proudly. The thing is, Tom continued, your dad didn't want you to take over alone. He wanted you and Jack to balance each other out. Your caution with his ambition, he thought you'd make a hell of a team. Jack doesn't seem interested in being part of a team. He wants to run things his way. Tom shrugged. Maybe, but he's also hurting right now. Feels like your dad didn't trust him. And I'm supposed to fix that. How, exactly? I don't have all the answers, kiddo. Just sharing what I know. He drained his coffee cup. But I will tell you this. Your dad built that company on relationships and trust. People hired Wilson Construction because they knew your dad would do right by them, even if it meant making less profit. I thought about what Jack had said about missed opportunities and expansion, and he thought Jack would sacrifice that reputation for growth. He was concerned, Tom said diplomatically. Especially after that incident with the Westridge project. What incident? I hadn't heard about any problems with Westridge, a upscale development on the north side of town. Tom looked surprised. Jack didn't tell you. About 6 months ago, he convinced your dad to bid on the community center there. It was a bigger project than Wilson Construction typically handles, but Jack insisted they could manage it. He hired some new subcontractors from out of town, underbid the competition, and those subs cut corners, used cheaper materials than specified, rushed the job. The foundation developed cracks before they even finished framing. Your dad had to tear it all down and start over, at a significant loss. Tom shook his head. It nearly broke his heart, having the Wilson name associated with subpar work. I had no idea. The picture was becoming clearer now. Dad never mentioned it in our calls. He wouldn't have. He was protective of Jack, didn't want you to think poorly of him. And to be fair, Jack was devastated when it happened. He worked night and day alongside the crew to fix it. I sat back, processing this new information. It explained so much about Dad's decision, about Jack's defensiveness. Thank you for telling me, Tom. He nodded. Just thought you should have the full picture. For what it's worth, I think your dad made the right call. Not because Jack isn't capable, he is, but because you two together could be something special. He slid out of the booth with another wince. Think about it. That's all. After Tom left, I lingered over my half-eaten pancakes, turning our conversation over in my mind. The Westridge incident put everything in a new light. Jack's ambitious plans for the company weren't just theoretical. They'd already led to problems serious enough to damage Dad's reputation. No wonder he'd been concerned. But I also felt a new sympathy for my brother. He'd made a mistake, learned from it the hard way, and was still determined to push forward. That took courage. And Dad's solution, making me the controlling partner without even discussing it with either of us, suddenly seemed less wise, more like a desperate move made by a dying man who wouldn't be around to manage the fallout. I paid my bill, leaving Maggie a generous tip, and headed back to my car. Instead of returning to Mom's house, I found myself driving toward the Westridge development. I needed to see this project that had caused so much trouble. The community center stood near the entrance, a handsome building of stone and glass that looked nothing like the disaster Tom had described. Whatever problems had occurred, they'd clearly been fixed. I parked and walked around the perimeter, noticing the Wilson Construction sign still prominently displayed. Can I help you? I turned to find an older man in a Westridge security uniform watching me curiously. Just looking, I said with a smile. My father's company built this place. His expression cleared. Wilson Construction? Fine job they did, in the end. Are you Robert's daughter? Yes, Sarah Wilson. Thought you looked familiar. Got your dad's eyes. He extended a hand. Frank Delgado. I'm head of security here. We shook hands, and I decided to take a chance. I heard there were some issues during construction. Frank nodded. Bit of a mess at first. Those out-of-town contractors didn't know what they were doing, but your dad and your brother set things right. Tore it all down, started from scratch, brought in the regular Wilson crews. He gestured at the building. Ended up being only a month behind schedule, which was pretty miraculous considering my brother was involved in fixing it. This detail hadn't been in Tom's version. Oh yeah, he was here day and night. Seemed like he took it real personal, proving they could deliver what they promised. Frank smiled. Your dad was proud of how he handled it. Said so to anyone who'd listen. That didn't fit with the story I'd been constructing in my head, that Dad had lost faith in Jack because of the Westridge fiasco. If anything, it sounded like the incident had shown Jack's commitment to making things right. So why had Dad still felt the need to give me controlling interest? What was I missing? I thanked Frank and returned to my car, more confused than ever. As I pulled away from Westridge, my phone buzzed with a text from Jack. Need to talk. Found something in Dad's files you should see. Office at 3. I stared at the message, a sense of foreboding settling over me. Whatever Jack had found, I had a feeling it was going to complicate things even further. I arrived at Wilson Construction just before 3, my mind still churning with questions. What could Jack possibly have found in Dad's files that was so important? Part of me hoped it would clarify Dad's reasoning, while another part dreaded what revelations might be coming. The office was quiet, most of the staff already gone for the day. I made my way down the familiar hallway to Dad's, now Jack's, office, my footsteps echoing on the worn carpet. The door was ajar, and I could see Jack hunched over the desk, surrounded by stacks of folders and loose papers. "Hey," I said, tapping lightly on the doorframe. "You wanted to see me?" Jack looked up, his face uncharacteristically pale. "Sarah." "Yeah, come in and close the door." Something in his tone made my stomach knot. I did as he asked and took a seat across from him. "What's going on?" "Your text sounded urgent." He pushed a manila folder across the desk toward me. "I was going through Dad's personal files, trying to get a handle on some of the older projects for the quarterly tax filing. Found this in the back of the cabinet." I opened the folder cautiously. Inside was a stack of medical reports, lab results, and a letter from someone named Dr. Carlton at Mayo Clinic. The date on the letter was nearly 8 months ago, well before Dad's official diagnosis. "I don't understand," I said, scanning the documents. "What is all this?" Dad knew he was sick long before he told any of us. Jack's voice was tight with controlled emotion. He was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer almost 8 months before he said anything. The doctors gave him less than a year from the start. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Man, that's not possible. He only told us 4 months ago." Read the letter. I picked up Dr. Carlton's letter and forced myself to focus on the words. It was a response to Dad's request for a second opinion, confirming the original diagnosis and providing treatment options. The prognosis was blunt. Even with aggressive treatment, survival beyond 8 to 10 months would be considered exceptional for a cancer this advanced. "I don't understand," I repeated, feeling numb. Why would he hide this from us? From Mom? Jack's laugh was hollow. "That's what I've been asking myself all afternoon. But then I found this." He slid another document toward me, an email printout from Dad to Mr. Peterson, dated just 2 weeks after the Mayo Clinic letter. My eyes caught on phrases that made my heart sink. Necessary changes to my will. Sarah must have controlling interest. Jack will fight this decision. And most damning of all, I won't be here to see the fallout. He planned this whole thing, Jack said, his voice eerily calm. From the beginning, he knew exactly what he was doing. I set the email down, trying to process what this meant. But why? Why keep his diagnosis secret for so long? Why set us up for this conflict? I have a theory. Jack leaned back in Dad's chair, running a hand through his hair. "Remember that big argument we had at Christmas? About how I wanted to bid on the Miller Heights development?" I did remember. It was the last time our whole family had been together before Dad got Sick. Or rather, before he told us he was sick. Jack had been passionate about expanding the company, taking on bigger commercial projects. Dad had been adamantly against it, insisting Wilson Construction should stick to what they knew best: residential work and small commercial buildings. You two almost came to blows, I recalled. Mom had to separate you. What you don't know is what Dad said to me after you went to bed that night. Jack's eyes held a distant pain. He told me I was being reckless, that I'd run his company into the ground if I ever got control of it. He said I didn't have the judgment to lead. I winced. That sounded harsh, even for Dad in one of his more stubborn moods. He was probably just upset. In the heat of the moment, he already knew he was dying, Sarah. Jack cut me off. He knew he had months to live, and instead of telling his family, he spent that time making arrangements to prevent me from inheriting what should have been mine. The bitterness in his voice was palpable, and despite our differences, I felt a surge of sympathy for him. It was a cruel thing for Dad to have done, not just keeping his diagnosis secret, but using that time to orchestrate this painful scenario. Maybe there's more to it than that, I suggested, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The Westridge project happened after Christmas, Jack finished for me. After Dad had already decided I wasn't fit to run the company. Maybe that's why he let me take lead on it in the first place, to prove his point. That thought had an ugly ring of truth to it. Had Dad set Jack up to fail? It seemed unthinkable, and yet the evidence was right here on the desk between us. What did Mom say about all this? I asked. Does she know you found these? A shadow crossed Jack's face. I haven't shown her yet. Wanted to talk to you first. That surprised me. Why? Because despite everything, you're my sister. His voice softened slightly. And I thought you deserved to know that Dad manipulated both of us. He made this choice when he was bitter and angry, not on his deathbed like everyone thinks. I sat back, trying to absorb it all. Dad had kept his illness secret for months. He'd made arrangements to pass over Jack long before the Westridge incident, and he'd put me in an impossible position without ever asking if it was what I wanted. What are you going to do? I finally asked. Jack sighed, suddenly looking exhausted. I don't know. Contest the will? Maybe. But that would mean dragging all this out in public, hurting Mom even more. He gestured at the papers scattered across the desk. What do you think we should do? The fact that he said we wasn't lost on me. For the first time since Dad's death, Jack was treating me like an ally rather than an adversary. I think we need to talk to Mom, I said slowly. She deserves to know the truth, however painful. And then I trailed off, not sure what came next. And then we decide about the company, Jack finished. Together. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of emotions, anger at Dad for his deception, sympathy for Jack, and an unexpected sense of possibility that maybe, just maybe, this mess could lead to something positive between my brother and me. There's something else you should know, Jack said, hesitating. I got an offer yesterday, from Grayson Development. My eyebrows shot up. Marcus Grayson wants to buy Wilson Construction. He's offering well above market value, says he wants our client list and reputation. Jack seemed to be watching me carefully. I told him I'd think about it. The implications were clear. If we sold the company, we'd both walk away with significant money and neither of us would have to deal with Dad's problematic legacy. Is that what you want? I asked. To sell? Jack was quiet for a long moment. When 24 hours ago, I would have said no. This company is in my blood. But now, he gestured at the medical reports. I don't know anymore. What about you? Would selling make your decision easier? It was a fair question. Going back to Portland, continuing my career there, it would certainly be the simpler path. But something in me resisted the idea of letting Wilson Construction, the company Dad had built from nothing, disappear. Well, let's talk to Mom first, I said. Then we can discuss the Grayson offer. Jack nodded, gathering the documents back into the folder. She's expecting us for dinner anyway. Might as well get this over with. As we left the office together, I felt a strange sense of solidarity with my brother that had been missing for years. Whatever happened next, at least we were facing it on the same side. The drive to Mom's house, the house I'd grown up in, was silent. Jack followed behind me in his own car. and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror as if to make sure he was still there, still committed to this difficult conversation we were about to have. The folder of medical reports sat on the passenger seat beside me, a ticking bomb of family secrets. Spring had fully arrived in Lakeside, and Mom's front yard was a riot of daffodils and tulips. Dad had always joked that his construction skills didn't extend to gardening, but Mom had enough green thumb for both of them. Seeing the carefully tended flower beds made my throat tighten. How many hours had she spent out here while Dad was keeping his terminal diagnosis to himself? We arrived at the same time, parking one behind the other in the driveway. Jack grabbed the folder from my car and waited for me to join him before walking to the front door. "And are we really doing this?" I asked, suddenly hesitant. "It's going to devastate her." Jack's expression was grim, but determined. "She has a right to know. Dad kept her in the dark for months, Sarah. That wasn't his decision to make. He was right, of course." Still, my hand trembled slightly as I rang the doorbell. A silly formality, but I hadn't yet felt comfortable using my old key since coming back. Mom answered quickly, her face lighting up when she saw both of us. "My two favorite people. What a wonderful surprise to have you both for dinner." She hugged each of us in turn, and I tried not to stiffen at the contact, knowing what was coming. I made lasagna, Jack's favorite. It's almost ready. The house smelled like tomato sauce and garlic bread, warm and inviting. Photos of our family through the years lined the hallway. School portraits, vacation snapshots, Jack's college graduation. So many captured moments of a family that had seemed solid and unshakable. Had it all been an illusion? "Let's have some wine first," Mom suggested, leading us to the living room. "I opened that Cabernet you brought last time, Sarah." "Mom, we need to talk to you about something," Jack said before she could head to the kitchen. His voice was gentler than I'd heard it in weeks. "It's important." She must have registered the seriousness in his tone because her smile faded and she sank slowly onto the sofa. "What is it? Has something happened at the company?" Jack and I exchanged a glance, and I nodded for him to continue. He sat beside Mom and placed the folder on the coffee table. "I found these today, in Dad's private files at the office." His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "They're medical reports, from 8 months ago." Mom's face went very still. "What kind of medical reports?" "Dad was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 8 months before he told any of us," I said, sitting on Mom's other side. "He kept it secret. Even from you." She stared at me blankly for a moment, then reached for the folder with hands that weren't quite steady. We sat in silence as she paged through the documents, her expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally, a deep hurt that was painful to witness. "I don't understand," she whispered, echoing my earlier reaction. "Why would he hide this? I was his wife. We shared everything." "There's more," Jack said reluctantly. "He contacted Mr. Peterson about changing his will just 2 weeks after getting this diagnosis, long before he told us he was sick." Mom looked up sharply. "The changes to the will, giving Sarah controlling interest in the company." Jack nodded. "He decided that months ago, Mom. Not on his deathbed like we thought." I watched her absorb this, saw the flicker of realization cross her face. "Oh, Robert," she murmured, more to herself than to us. "You stubborn old fool." There was anger in her voice, but something else too. A sad resignation, as if this revelation was painful but not entirely surprising. "Did you know?" I asked. "About his plans for the company?" Mom set the folder aside and looked at me directly. Not the specifics, but I knew something was bothering him, especially after that Christmas argument. She turned to Jack. "He was worried about you, sweetheart. About your ambitions for the company. So worried he couldn't talk to me directly? So worried he had to manipulate Sarah into taking my place?" The hurt in Jack's voice was raw. "It wasn't about taking your place." Mom sighed deeply. "Your father was proud of you, Jack, but he built that company on certain principles, quality over quantity, relationships over profits. He was afraid those values would get lost if the company expanded too quickly. And he didn't think I shared those values." Jack's voice had an edge to it now. Mom reached for his hand. "He thought you were young and eager to prove yourself. He worried you'd make decisions for the wrong reasons." She squeezed his fingers. The Westridge project scared him, even though you fixed the problems. And he decided Sarah was the better choice. Someone who hasn't worked for the company in 5 years. I winced at the bitterness in his tone. But Mom didn't seem offended. He thought you needed balance. Each other's balance, specifically. She looked between us. Sarah's caution with your vision. He believed in both of you. Together. Then why the secrecy? I asked. Why not just tell us what he wanted? We could have had months to prepare, to transition. Mom's eyes filled with tears. But that's the part I'm angriest about. He robbed us of that time together, knowing what was coming. She wiped at her cheeks. I think he was afraid. Of the cancer. Of losing control. Of facing the end. It was easier for him to keep working, to pretend everything was normal for as long as possible. While making arrangements behind our backs, Jack muttered. Yes. Mom didn't try to defend it. It was wrong of him. Unfair to all of us. She picked up the folder again, her fingers tracing the Mayo Clinic letterhead. I keep thinking of all the signs I missed. The weight loss he attributed to a new diet. The pain he blamed on getting older. The way he'd lock himself in the bathroom with his stomach issues. Her voice broke. He suffered alone when he didn't have to. The three of us sat in silence for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. I found myself remembering Dad's last months, how stoic he'd been through the treatments, how he'd insisted on working until just weeks before the end. Had it all been a performance? A desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of normalcy and control for as long as possible? There's something else you should know, Jack said eventually. Grayson Development has made an offer to buy the company. A generous one. Mom looked up, surprised. And you're considering it? Jack shrugged. It would solve the inheritance problem. Sarah could go back to Portland. I could start fresh somewhere else. And neither of us would have to deal with Dad's manipulations. Is that what you want? To walk away from Wilson Construction? The question hung in the air between us. I found myself holding my breath, waiting for Jack's answer. Despite everything we'd learned, the thought of selling the company to Marcus Grayson, a developer known for cutting corners and building quickly rather than well, felt wrong in a way I couldn't quite articulate. I don't know, Jack admitted. A week ago, I would have said no without hesitation. Now, he trailed off, looking lost. And you, Sarah? Mom turned to me. Do you want to sell? I hesitated. I came back to Lakeside planning to honor Dad's wishes, even though I didn't understand them. Now that I know the truth, I glanced at Jack. I'm not sure what the right thing is anymore. Mom was quiet for a long moment, looking thoughtfully at the family photos on the mantel. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. Your father made mistakes. Big ones. He let fear drive his decisions at the end, and that wasn't fair to either of you. She looked at us each in turn. But Wilson Construction meant everything to him, not just as a business, but as a legacy, something he built that would outlast him. A legacy built on lies, Jack said, but the anger had faded from his voice, replaced by weariness. No, Mom shook her head firmly. A legacy built on 40 years of honest work, fair dealings, and buildings that will stand for generations. Don't let these last few months erase all of that. I felt a lump forming in my throat. She was right. Whatever Dad's failings at the end, they didn't negate the company he'd built or the principles he'd stood for throughout his career. I need some time to think, Jack said, standing abruptly. Sorry about dinner, Mom, but I'm not hungry anymore. Mom nodded, understanding in her eyes. Take all the time you need, both of you. She looked down at the folder in her lap. I have some processing to do myself. Jack headed for the door, but paused in the entryway. Sarah, you coming? I glanced at Mom, reluctant to leave her alone with this bombshell we'd dropped. Go, she said gently. I'll be fine. Some things are better processed in solitude. I hugged her tightly, feeling the fragility in her shoulders that hadn't been there before Dad's illness. Call me if you need anything. I mean it. I will. She squeezed my hand. And Sarah, whatever you and Jack decide about the company, I'll support you, both of you. Outside, the evening air was cool and fragrant with spring blossoms. Jack stood by his car, keys in hand, but making no move to leave. I want to get a drink? he asked when I approached. I could use one after that. Yeah, I said. Me too. We ended up at O'Malley's, a dive bar on the edge of town that had somehow survived multiple decades without changing a single light fixture or bar stool. Dad used to bring his crew here on Fridays for the cheap beer and decent burgers. It seemed fitting, somehow, to be discussing his legacy in a place where he'd spent so many hours. Jack got us each a beer without asking what I wanted. I was surprised he remembered my preference for IPAs. To Dad, he said, raising his glass. Complicated bastard that he was. I clinked my glass against his. To Dad. We drank in silence for a moment. The familiar sounds of the bar. Clinking glasses, low conversations, a baseball game on the ancient TV, washing over us. I used to come here with him sometimes, Jack said, picking at the label on his bottle. After work on Fridays, he'd introduce me to all the subcontractors, make sure everyone knew I was his son. He was proud of you, I said, meaning it. Whatever happened at the end, that was always true. Jack's mouth twisted in a half smile. Maybe, but not proud enough to trust me with his company. It wasn't about trust, Jack. Not entirely. I took another sip of beer, organizing my thoughts. And I've been thinking about what Mom said, about Dad wanting balance. Maybe he saw something in both of us that he thought would work well together. Or maybe he was a control freak who couldn't let go, even in death. Jack's tone was bitter, but there was less heat behind it than before. Maybe both are true. I shrugged. People are complicated. Dad more than most. We fell silent again, each lost in our own memories. The bartender, a gruff older man with impressive mutton chops, set 2 shots of whiskey in front of us. On the house, he said, for Robert's kids. Jack raised an eyebrow as the man walked away. Dad must have tipped well, or told good stories. I picked up the shot glass, the amber liquid catching the dim light. Do you remember when he used to take us to job sites on Saturdays? Let us help hammer nails into scrap wood? Jack's face softened. Yeah, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Getting to wear a hard hat, learning the names of all the tools. He tossed back his shot. That's when I decided I wanted to be just like him. You are like him, I said. More than you realize. The good parts, the dedication, the passion for building things that last. The problem-solving under pressure. Not the secretive, manipulative parts. I laughed despite myself. Well, the jury's still out on that. Jack cracked a smile. The first genuine one I'd seen since coming back to Lakeside. Fair enough. He signaled for another round. So, what do we do about Grayson's offer? I took a breath, gathering my courage. I've been thinking about that. What if we don't sell? You want to keep the company? Run it together like Dad planned. Maybe. I traced a pattern in the condensation on my glass. I know it sounds crazy. I have a job in Portland, a life there, and you and I haven't exactly been on the best terms lately. That's an understatement. But here's the thing, Jack. I've spent the last week looking at the books, talking to employees, visiting job sites. Wilson Construction is special. The relationships Dad built, the reputation for quality, that's worth something. Maybe more than Grayson's money. Jack studied me, his expression unreadable. And what about my risky ideas for expansion? The ones Dad was so worried about. Some of them actually make sense, I admitted. I looked at your proposal for the Miller Heights development. The numbers work, and it would be a natural extension of what we already do well. You're serious? He sounded genuinely surprised. You think we could make it work? The two of us running Dad's company together? I think it's worth considering. I met his eyes directly. Look, I'm not saying it would be easy. We'd need clear boundaries, defined roles, you handling business development and operations, me overseeing project management and financials. But we'd consult each other on major decisions. A partnership. Jack mulled this over, with you still having controlling interest. On paper, yes, but in practice, we'd aim for consensus. I leaned forward. I'm not interested in shutting down your ideas, Jack. Just in making sure we evaluate them carefully, protect the company's reputation, and grow at a sustainable pace. Jack was quiet for a long moment, turning his empty shot glass between his fingers. You'd have to move back to Lakeside. I know. I'd need to give notice at Andrews and Bailey, find a place to live, all of that. The thought was both terrifying and strangely appealing. But I think I could be happy here again. Especially if it meant preserving Dad's legacy. The right way. Not just Dad's legacy, Jack said thoughtfully. Ours too. Wilson and Wilson. Something warm unfurled in my chest at the phrase. I like the sound of that. So do I. Jack signaled for another round. But there's one more thing we need to discuss. What's that? The Westridge project. I need you to understand what really happened there. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. Dad told you I pushed for cheaper subcontractors, right? That I rushed the job. Something like that, I admitted. Jack's jaw tightened. Here's what really happened. Dad wanted to bid on the community center. It was his idea, not mine. But he underbid it because he wanted to beat out Richardson Construction. Old rivalry there. This was not the version I'd heard from Tom. Go on. When we won the bid, I ran the numbers and realized we were going to lose money unless we found ways to cut costs. I suggested using some newer subs who'd been trying to get work with us. They were hungry, eager to prove themselves. Jack took a sip of his fresh beer. Dad agreed reluctantly, but when the foundation issues appeared, he blamed me entirely, said I'd pushed him into a corner. And had you? Jack held my gaze steadily. I pushed for the new subs, yes, but the underbid was all him. And when things went south, I stayed on site 16 hours a day for 3 weeks straight to fix it. Used my own savings to hire extra help so we'd stay close to schedule. I remembered what Frank Delgado had said at Westridge, that Jack had taken it personally, proving they could deliver what they promised. And why didn't you tell me this before? Would you have believed me over Dad? Jack's question wasn't accusing, just matter of fact. I don't know, I answered honestly. But I believe you now. Something shifted between us in that moment. A new understanding, perhaps, or the beginnings of real trust. So, Jack said, raising his glass. Wilson and Wilson? I clinked my glass against his. Wilson and Wilson. We spent the next couple hours at that sticky bar table, mapping out how our partnership might work. Jack had innovative ideas for expanding their client base to include more commercial projects, while I suggested process improvements I'd learned at Andrews and Bailey. We argued about hiring priorities, equipment upgrades, and marketing strategies, but the arguments felt productive rather than divisive. By the time we left O'Malley's, walking out into the cool night air, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The pain of Dad's deception was still there, but it was tempered now by the possibility of something new, something that honored his legacy while allowing Jack and me to build our own. We should tell Mom, Jack said as we reached our cars, about our decision. First thing tomorrow, I agreed. And then we need to talk to the staff. Let them know nothing's changing. At least, nothing important. Jack nodded. And we should call Grayson. Tell him the company's not for sale at any price. I'll let you handle that one. I smiled. You always were better at telling people no. He laughed. And you were always better at making it sound reasonable. He hesitated, then added, this might actually work, you know. Us, running Dad's company together. Not just Dad's company anymore, I reminded him. Ours. As I drove back to Mom's house that night, I found myself thinking about choices. Dad's choice to keep his illness secret, his choice to pit Jack and me against each other, however unintentionally, but also our choices now, to work together despite the pain, to build something that honored the past while creating a new future. Dad had made mistakes at the end of his life, decisions born of fear and a desperate need for control. But in his own convoluted way, he'd brought Jack and me back together, forced us to see each other as allies rather than rivals. Maybe that had been his plan all along. Or maybe he'd just gotten lucky. Either way, Wilson Construction would continue, with both of his children at the helm. Together, as he'd wanted. Just not in the way he'd expected. The next morning, Jack and I sat down with Mom at her kitchen table and told her our decision. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of relief and joy, not sadness. Your father would be so proud, she said, clasping both our hands. Not because you're doing what he wanted, but because you're making it your own. We still need to work out the details, I cautioned. It won't be simple. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Mom said with the wisdom of someone who'd been married to a stubborn contractor for 42 years. But you two together. That's something Robert got right, even if his methods were all wrong. As we left Mom's house to head to the office, our office now, Jack bumped my shoulder lightly with his. Ready for this, partner. I looked at the Wilson construction sign in the distance, imagining our future there, the challenges, the disagreements, but also the satisfaction of building something meaningful together. Ready as I'll ever be, I said, and meant it.